Okay, here we go. Hi, everybody. It's Carolien Leavitt. I'm the co-founder of Mighty Blaze. The book initiative that was started after the lockdown to bring writers and booksellers and independent bookstores and readers all together. We're now in our 5th year. We have over 33 passionate volunteers, and we hope that we're going to continue to teenagehood and adulthood and old ages. So anyway, today is really, really special. One of my favorite people is here, and also one of my favorite authors, A.S. King, Amy King. Pick the Lock. This book is extraordinary. Now, Amy is known as a YA author, and I'll talk about that in my introduction, but this book is for everyone. The highest compliment I can say about a book is it broke me in the best way. This book broke me in the best way. It's that important. So a few housekeeping things. If you have questions for Amy, pop them in the chat. We'll get to them. Don't be shy. This is going to be taped, so it'll be on the Mighty Blaze YouTube station forever, so you can watch it again and again and again and tell your friends. It'll also probably be a podcast in a few months, so it's the gift that keeps on giving. Please buy your books from indie bookstores. I've made it really easy for you because I've put up a link to bookshop.org. All you have to do is click on it and I'll take you right to Amy's book. So before I let Amy talk, and I'm excited about that, I have to tell you something about her. Amy Sarah King is an American writer of short fiction and young adult fiction. She's the recipient of a 2022 Margaret Edwards Award for her significant and lasting contribution to young adult literature. She's been called one of the best YA writers working today by the New York Times, and she's actually one of YA fiction's most decorated. And I'm telling you, with Pick the Lock, she's going to start winning awards in the adult sector. She's taught for a decade in MFA programs. She's the founder of Gracie's House, a charity that funds safe spaces for LGBTQ and youth in rural areas. And let's talk about Pick the Lock. Pick the Lock is extraordinary. It's wild, moving, terrifying, and it's true. It's just so true. It's part rock opera, part home movies, part coming of age. It's for everyone, really. It centers around Jane, who lives in a Victorian mansion with her younger brother and her controlling, abusive dad and aunt. And her mother is confined to a series of pneumatic tubes when she's home. Pick the Lock is all about, well, it's really all about different kinds of domestic violence, but it's also about rescue too, and resilience. It's about rescuing yourself and rescuing others. So I'm just going to read some of the praise, and then we'll talk. Books to the List gave it a starred review and said it's a remarkable, character-driven book that dazzles with originality. BCCB Star Review said, a worthy literary heir to feminist novels like The Stepford Wives, recast for a new generation. Much needed, thought-provoking tale of survival and triumph. Compulsively readable, says Kirkus Review. Publishers Weekly raved. Unconventional narrative blends punk anthems and bewildering interludes from a shifting rat, who I loved, with King's quirky blend of present-day issues and mind-bending twists to unlock complex, thought-provoking insights. So one more thing I have to say is that everyone has prized moments. One of my most prized moments is I was a guest at a big literary convention, and of course, I just wanted to go home. I felt shy. I felt terrible. I just felt no one likes me. No one knows who I am. I just want to go home. And I went into the ladies' room, and as I was slogging out, there comes this radiant creature, Amy King, saying, oh, Caroline, I'm so glad you're here. And we hugged, and it was just the best. It was just the best. And I've never forgotten it. So thank you so much for being here, Amy. I'm delighted to talk about you, and I'm more delighted to talk about this absolutely magnificent book.
Thank you so much for having me, Caroline. And I have to say, I was just as happy to see you in that bathroom as you were to see me. And I remember it very well. There's a very long story behind that for me, which I will not tell now, but it had to do with Mary Steenburgen and Ted Danson.
I know that story. I know that story.
I'd stuck my foot in my mouth terribly. And to this day, I hope Mary Steenburgen forgives me. But anyway, Yeah, let's talk about Pick the Lock. I mean, this was a book of my heart. It was a book that it's not the first time I've written about domestic violence. About 4 novels ago, I wrote Still Life with Tornado. I still get at least one letter every month or so from, and again, it was published in YA, but the New York Times pretty much from many books ago calls me crossover, and I think they're right. And that's a nice thing and everything. But the problem is that you're still publishing through a children's or imprint,
Right.
and therefore publicities through a children's imprint, and which is wonderful because it gets me in the school and library market, which is where I like to do my work, talk to young people about these sorts of things. But what it doesn't do is hit the adult market in any way. And yet these books have always been somehow reaching the people they need to. And so with Still Life with Tornado, which was also about domestic violence, I get a letter about once a month or so that says, "Oh, thanks for this book. I'm getting a divorce now." And I'm just like, "Oh, good. I'm glad you
Well, good.
right?"
Well, that's probably why I wanted to have this on a Muddy Blades, because this is definitely a book for adults. I mean, I think young adults will love it, but it just struck such major chords within me, and I felt it was so important on so many levels. So, what I want to ask you is, tell us about the inception story, as much as you would like to, and as much as you wouldn't like to. You don't have to.
Well, I mean, all right. So I write this one isn't surrealist in that way. It has some twists, no doubt, but I'm a surrealist in the YA world. It's the one place that I could be one. Because when I was getting rejected for 15 years, they were kind of like, "You're a woman and you're a little weird for that." And I was like, right, but this is how I see the world. A little like Frida Kahlo says, they call me a surrealist. This is how I see the world. I've had a lot of interesting trauma in my life, and I think I see the world through a very different lens. And so immediately when something happens to me, I make it into a metaphor. And so something happened in my life where I wasn't in control of the narrative about me. Does that make sense? Many of us are in that position, pretty much all the time, right?
Everybody.
Right? And so I was sitting right here at the desk, and I drew a picture of a human-sized hamster tube with a chair inside of it, and wrote the word system. And then I stuck it here I only have one picture on my desk. It's of Hawkeye Pierce. Just to clarify, not Alan Alda, Hawkeye Pierce. And so I have him there. He's always looking at me, and I stuck it there under his face. And I looked at it for a long time, and I realized that, women on a whole don't have control of our narrative.
That's right.
Period. We don't. And in the larger world, in the larger political world, there are people still talking about parts of our bodies that they don't even understand how those things work.
Right.
So we're being misrepresented constantly, even our bodies and our minds and our capabilities, right? And so I thought, well, but then I zeroed in on the fact that I wanted to write about a family, and I wrote like maybe I tried to open it maybe 4 times. Each time Jane's voice, she's 16, right? Jane's voice sounded really Victorian, and I'm like, this is weird. Like, this
That's
isn't
interesting.
right. And then I was like, oh, and then one day, and this is how I work with students and other people when it comes to like starting a book. One day I got really mad, and hold on, I have to hit the thing. There we go. I got really, really angry about something, and out came that prologue. And I was like, that's the voice. She is Victorian, but this is why. She's in a Victorian house with a fake Victorian dad, and all these things. And then the punk opera eventually came about halfway through writing it. I was like, oh, I guess this is happening. This is because I do use, in a way, I do use a surrealist method to write first drafts.
Right.
But
Okay.
obviously I revise. So yeah, but that's where it started.
It's incredible. I want to talk a little bit more about writing a book gear. Did you deliberately gear to an older audience, or is it just writing? Because I know so much that what a genre is often a marketing decision. Where they want to put it. It has nothing to do with the read. It's kind of like, well, how do you? Charlotte's Web is also an adult book. It's like that kind of thing. It definitely is, and you will cry over that if you're an adult. Yeah. So when you were doing that, was it freeing, or were you thinking, oh my God, what am I doing? Or
No,
were you just gorgeously, just as you always do, risking it all and writing your best? I bet it's that, right?
it is
Yeah.
that, and, you know, all my books, like, I have a joke about my book Dig. It won the Michael L. Prince Award in 2020, and I always say, like, actually have a little thing on my link tree that says the adult version of Dig, which is the same version as for teens, right? It's the exact same version, but it's just sort of like, guys, get over the marketing crap, right?
Yes.
It's like, it was the other
Yes.
night, I was in Illinois yesterday, and the night before, it got really chilly there, same as it got here, and I was like, "Oh, man, I don't have a coat." So I walked into Walmart with this teacher who drove me there, and we both went to the men's department where the jackets were. And I'm like, why did we both think I was going to buy a men's jacket? But you knew I was gonna, and I bought this excellent Dickies jacket for so cheap.
Because they're, yeah, the cheaper and
Right?
they're better made. Yeah.
Right. But it was the fact that that's the marketing, right? It's marketed to men doesn't mean I can't buy it, you know? So it's the same vibe. But a lot of times there's a sort of, I don't know what it is. There's certainly a reticence to read books that are YA, because YA also has, you know, kind of 15-year-olds in love, and maybe adults don't want
Right.
to read that. And I get that. It's just that my books happen to cross over. It's how it is. And it's a tricky marketing space, but I'm glad that you liked it.
Oh yeah. Books.
I agree.
You know what? A good book is a good book is a good book. This is for anybody of any age. Maybe not 3 or 4, but you know, anybody who can, who can read. So I wanted to talk about the structure, which was just sublime. There's a rock opera, there's a script, there's a whole movie, and then there is Brutus, a rat who has a story of his own. Does this all come out organically? Do you plan it? Was there any way that you tried that didn't work out? Because I'm always interested, not just in the successes of writers. I think it's important for people to know that writers, there are a lot of failures along the way to success. So can you talk about that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. When it comes to this book, lately my young adult novels are taking about 3 years to write, and in that 3 years, about half of the original words end up on the floor. So there's
I
probably about 40 or 50,000 words on the floor of this office that was,
Great.
and I put them in wonderful files that are called cut files. Like, oh, I can come back and get it. I have never gone back. That's a lie. I think one time I went back for one little thing in some book, right? But I have those files. Just to make myself feel better. But honestly, I never go back to them. And, you know, well, okay. So like most of my books, I do write, I'm a pantser, and I don't really know what I'm writing. And then weird stuff shows up. Like suddenly the rat starts to talk, and I'm like, really? Now I know myself well enough, because like 8 or 10, 12 books ago, it was a pagoda that was talking. And so that was weird. But now I'm used to it. I'm like, oh, okay, I guess the rat talks. And then I see what he has to say. And I'm like, that's interesting. And I keep going. And if he talks again, I'm like, just like the pagoda. I was like, oh, I guess this pagoda wants to talk. So same with the rat. And I thought it was a good perspective to have, because no one from the outside could tell the rat story, right?
That's
No
right.
one from the outside knows the
Absolutely.
rat story. And so so that became natural. And then yeah, the punk opera was like, you know,
That's so great.
well, the mother's so we should tell watchers. I said the mother is a punk rock star, like literally. And
Right.
so she doesn't tour that much, right? But she's on tour like this during this chunk of time. This is about, what is it, 8 months, spans over about 8 months, I guess, or something like that, or 6 months. When she's on tour, both national and international, during this time. And the one thing that Jane's dad really doesn't want is for Jane to turn out anything like her mother, because he hates her mother. It's very clear
Right.
in the book that he absolutely hates this woman and misrepresents her and whatever, especially to the children, which of course she can't do anything about, because she's also technically in the tubes. We'll talk about that in a second. But when it comes to the writing process, yeah, a lot ends up on the floor. One of the biggest things I do, I don't know if you can see that behind me. I'll show you.
I can sort of see it. Oh, I'd love to see it better.
Okay.
I love to look at people's processes.
So I know I love the process, right?
Great.
So I have the whole thing, like, and I get to a point, right? And I have a bunch there. I get to a point where I'm like, I'm lost, right? So I have maybe the intro. I'm like, oh, this is working out great. And over here, I'm like, okay, this is Monday and this is Tuesday, you know, and I try and figure out like this structure. And I might get here and be like, I am lost, right? I am just lost. So then I when I work in Word, I do like headings. So these are all different headings. And then these are like, let's see, these are all the home movies. This is just straight narrative. This is the script, the libretto, sorry, the opera libretto. And
Opera.
then this used to be pink, but that's Brutus the Rat. And so I can sort of organize myself and just sort of see where I am. It's like a map. And then this is the last one for this book. So it's taller than I am.
Wow. How many of those did you have before you got to this last one?
I probably had maybe five, six. Yeah. And so it takes a while. And what happens, like if I showed you the first ones, what's so funny is that I push chapters that I like, but I don't know where they belong down to the bottom. So then what'll happen is that like, maybe these will be really in order, but then suddenly there's just like this blob of completely out of place, out of tune things. And I'm like, what are these even about? And then it was really funny because the name for the book, Pick the Lock, and its corresponding song, I found that in the bottom junk. I was like, I wonder what's in the junk, right? Yes, there was like 100 pages of junk, and I was like, I wonder what's in here. And I'm like, ooh, that could go here. Ooh, that looks good. Oh, no, that goes. And then I'm like, who wrote this song? And like, look, man, I don't write drunk or edit drunk. I don't do anything drunk. I don't do anything not sober. I'm like, I don't remember this at all, but I loved the song. I was like, oh yes. And then I figured the name of the book out. So honestly, it takes a long time. I mean, and my process is frustrating. I can't use this book as an example, but I'll use the book Dig. Dig has 5 characters, or 5 of their grandchildren, right? And 2.5 years into that book, I had 2 comments because I work and I write myself notes and track changes all the time. And I had a comment, like one page that said, who is the 5th cousin? And the 5th cousin is this mysterious person who's already been through this book. You know, she's all over the book. And so who is the 5th cousin? And then it said, who is the freak anyway? The freak, that was the character.
Right.
And I'm like, 2.5 years in, these 2 comments are like 10 pages apart. And I'm like, Amy, how did you not see this? So in a way, I am always, the way I write a book is the same way I read a book. I'm surprised. And I feel that comes out in the read. It comes out in the read.
Yes, you're right. It does. I thought I had a book finished, and then I was reading it and I realized the time frame is it's set in the wrong time frame. I have to go back. And as soon as I did that, it was, it's like a year's more of work, but it was the right decision.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, you were going to talk about the tubes. Talk about the tubes, please.
I will talk about the tubes.
That's incredible. It's
really where it started because, like I said, the idea of being misrepresented and not being able to say any or do anything about it, you're kind of inside this tube where no one can see or hear you. So what happened was I looked at it for a while there next to Hawkeye, and I was like, I started to Google stuff on my phone. I was off doing stuff and I Googled pneumatic tube systems. And so I looked up the history of pneumatic tubes and pneumatics generally. And it was fascinating history, which I'm not going to get into here. But I mean, so many places had these little pneumatic, usually postal, right? So towns like cities like London, Dublin, Paris, can't remember. There was a German city as well, somewhere else that was really odd in Europe. That was at a certain time in the late 1800s. And then it came over here. And the first person to use it here in the States was John Wanamaker in the Wanamaker's department store in Philadelphia on Walnut Street, which I lived in Philly for a long time. So I felt a kinship with that. And in a way that's part of Jane's name is she's Vandermaker, right? So the mom, Mina Vandermaker. So I gave her a little bit of Wanamaker. So because it was the pneumatics, right? But what's amazing is that even in New York City on Broadway, they had this beach pneumatic rail system, which was really just 2 blocks of Broadway. So it's still underneath, it's still under there. This special tunnel where people could get in. It was like a little people mover, but it only moved you 2 blocks up Broadway. Amazing, right? And then of course they shut it down. But for me, I was like, oh, you could, and now they have pneumatic elevators. So you can actually get a pneumatic elevator that looks like a tube. It's bonkers. So
they have them in the wealthy people that moved in across the way from us. They have an elevator like that you can watch it like.
Yep, it's like a weird, yeah, exactly.
It's so weird.
It's so cool though, right?
Yeah.
Because you don't need the cables, you don't need all that extra space, you just need a big fan. And so the more I looked into it, the more I was like, oh, this is possible. All right, I'm going to do it. And I just pictured a large Victorian home, which would have been, a wealthy family's, summer home here in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. And I was like, yep, let's plop that somewhere and just invent this space. And then I did. But the tubes basically contain Jane's mother, Mina, So whenever she's not touring, which of course happened during the pandemic, she didn't tour at all, but she didn't tour that much. So whenever she was at home after 2018, she was confined to the tubes. Before then, she was confined as a lark, sometimes not, whenever her husband was mad at her and or wanted to keep her out of earshot, or keep her in a space where she couldn't talk. And so, but since 2018, she's been in there. So she's in like this capsule inside these tubes. And as far as Jane knows, and the reader knows, this system is confined just to the house. And dad has, his name's Vernon. He has the remote control and he can move her to wherever he wants. He can control the attachments. There's certain attachments on the tube system. So two-way communication, one-way communication, complete silence. There's even one for wet nurse, which is one of my weirdest scenes in that book and one of the grossest scenes, but also real. And so, so there's these attachments. And so that's how it works. But what you find out as you read, without spoilers, I'll just say what you find out as you read is that, like many other places that women have been confined, they can still make it into something that transports love and transports help to other women and children. Women will always be helping other women and children, even in their worst spaces. And that's part of also what we learn in the book. So.
That's right. I also wanted to say that it's also, Jane copes by rhyming, her rock band, helping others. But it's another thing that a lot of women do, which is making the best of a shitty situation.
Yeah.
And I think, there reaches a point where you don't have to do that. You don't have to cope anymore. You don't have to dwell on this situation because there is a way out. But a lot of times in a domestic situation, it becomes ingrained, it becomes a pattern, and it's really hard to see the exit.
Well, the culture doesn't make it easy either.
Right.
I mean, all of the reasons, all of the things that keep women in abusive relationships are sewn into the whole culture. So first of all, you can't get divorced, right? That's just a thing that we say in our heads. You can't get divorced. And then you can't get divorced because there's kids involved. So you've got that as well. So that's an extra one. And there's just so many things. And then, of course, when you have an abusive situation, you've got constant gaslighting. So you immediately doubt yourself when it comes to everything. Honestly, you'll even doubt like what you're doing. I doubted writing books. I doubted so many things when I was in a situation similar. So it's like, they're all sewn in there. The trap is there. And the biggest trap is in that book. There's somewhere that the number one question that people ask about abusive relationships is, why doesn't she leave? Well, if you're so smart, how about you get him to stop? How about that? How about you ask the right question?
I love that
question. I'm done with the wrong questions because people don't understand. I had someone recently actually say to me, it was just some random conversation on the Facebook, actually. And it was a total stranger. It was a friend's page. And somebody mentioned financial abuse. And I said, actually, financial abuse can work a bunch of different ways. You can be the only one working and therefore the only person. And the abuser could be like, oh, you can't kick me out. I don't have a job or any money or however it works.
Right. It's gaslighting.
Right. But this woman wrote back to me and she's like, well, if he doesn't have all the money, what's his rationale for abuse? And I got to write back and go, he doesn't need rationale. Abusers abuse. It's a mindset. It's an entitlement mindset. It has nothing to do with, it's not a reaction to the other person. It's a reaction to what's going on inside of them. And it is a mindset. And I wish more people understood it, but we don't talk about these things. Same as we don't talk about a million other things that have to do with women and their well-being.
Yeah. That's right. I also want to say that this is a really serious, harrowing book, but it's also hilariously funny. And I want to talk about the humor. Yeah. There's a part of the whole movies are really, really funny. There's a whole section like, let's find out about Jane, like almost like a game show. Yeah. When the rat is talking, it's hilariously funny. It's just, it's sort of like just when you think I'm going to drown, you're buoyed up because there's humor, and where there's humor, there's hope. So I want to know, while you were writing this, were you feeling all those things? Was it difficult at times for you, or?
Yeah, it was really hard. I mean, it took me a long time to write this book because, again, it's a giant metaphor because I have to write things through metaphor because that's the fairest way to do it. But it took me a long time, and like like, if you know my other books or if you know my speeches or just kind of how I am, even like, look, I work in trauma. I run grief groups. I work in so many different parts of trauma
Right.
that you can be there in the heavy and we're all laughing. Like, I come back from grief groups. Sometimes I run this grief group and I come back and Jackson, my son says, how was grief group? And I'll say, I swear my side still hurts. We laugh so hard because, because that's
You
what we
have
do,
to.
right?
That's what
That's
you
what we
do.
do. And so, so it just kind of comes naturally. And that's where the punk opera came in a little bit. Like,
I love
you know,
that.
you can read these heavy, heavy passages, and then suddenly it's like, here's a hilarious punk song about tree frogs. And and like that's, you know, that's kind of the vibe. And I also like Jane's I wouldn't call it sarcasm. I'd call it like uplifting smarminess. I don't know what to
Yeah.
call it. She
Yeah.
is so angry. And to see a young woman angry, even though she has to keep her face on, she has to keep looking like same as every
Right.
other woman, right? But to see a young woman be so steaming mad and just scheming and trying to figure out how to not just save herself because she knows those tubes are going to be containing her soon because she's also a woman, but she also wants to save her mom. And again, she believes that these tubes are just here. So she's like, well, this is easy as trying to, you know, trying to cut them out or something like that, just trying to free her mother from this space, not understanding that in a way, even just talking to her mother would free, loving her mother would free the space because her mother's been told and shown that she is hated by everyone in the house because of that narrative, right? The narrative that was told to those children, which is a fairly common thing. I hate to say I did a lot of research on this and found out how common it is to have a parent in a marriage turning the kids against another parent. I never
Yeah.
thought that happened in that way. And when you're in the middle of something like that, most people, you know, you don't know. Same as Mina, and that the mother, Mina, doesn't know in this book until she does, until she knows, and then she's like, wait. What? You know, like the same as if I said to you right now, well, Caroline, you know, here's a crazy lie someone told me about you. No one did, by the way, but like everyone talks so well of you. But like, you know, imagine I said that, you'd be like, wait, what? Everybody heard that? You know, that
I
kind of a
know.
vibe.
Yeah, but that's another thing I wanted to talk about, which is in terms of like the whole movie's gutted me because it's a memory of a time that you can think different things about. So did all the gaslighting, especially for women. When people tell us something, you know, so and so doesn't like you, for a man would say, screw them. A woman has been trained to say, like, what did I do wrong? How can I make this right? How can I change this and get this right? I really feel like a lot of stuff in this book is that things sometimes don't mean what you think they mean. Oh, you have an audience question. They want to know more about the kind of research that you did.
Let's see. More about the kind of research that I did. All right. Well, first of all, the pneumatic tube stuff, I got a little too into that. Got to be honest. I still have all the bookmarks on my phone because I don't know where I was. I was probably traveling. I don't even know anymore what the last 3 years were like. But beyond that, when it comes to domestic violence, I do some work with the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Domestic Violence. So it's sort of like I have had my feet in that topic for a while. There's actually a great book if you haven't read it. Anybody out there that has friends who might be in that situation or might be in this situation, I want to say, please read Why Does He Do That by Lundy Bancroft. It is the book that has saved more women's lives than I can tell you. And it's incredible that if you mention that book in a crowd, they'll go, oh, that book saved my life. Suddenly all these people like pop out. I met someone the other day who thought Lundy Bancroft was a woman. And I was like, but they were like, that book saved my life. And I'm like, it doesn't matter what you thought. It just matters that it saved your life. But when it comes, and that book is like, it's a playbook. That's an incredible playbook. And so in a way, when I was drafting Vernon, I really was looking at that book and looking at all the wild excuses that abusive men make to get women to continue to give them more, you know, time and space.
That's right.
Especially like I have a mental illness, or I am, but I have no money, or I have no, all these things that get you to, you know, keep them and try and look after them, which is what you want to do. The other thing I think we forget about domestic violence is that there's love involved. Love is complicated.
Right.
I just told my kid last year he fell in love. I was like, all right, now you don't lie, but I need you to understand you're in love. And that means you're going to lie. He goes, what? That's not true. I'm like, oh, dude, you're 16. You're going to lie so much in the next year. And he's like, no, I'm not. And it was so funny because eventually he was like, I know what you mean now, you know? But
Yeah, there is a lot of. I wanted to talk about something that we were talking about before we got on the program, which is in terms of this feeling from a lot of women that they feel sorry for the guy, even if they leave him, they feel like, well, maybe he needs to be forgiven or whatever. And I had said that, what, sometimes people don't. Some don't need to be forgiven. Sometimes you can think, well, I want to make peace with this. If a guy or any domestic partner does something that is cruel or mean, and if usually they do it because they want to do it, they want to do it. They're okay with it. So the best thing you can do is not try to forgive, but to just sort of step away. You can imagine them on the planet Jupiter and wish them well. You don't have to wish that they died, but you have nothing to do with them, and you don't have to be part of their recovery. That's all on them.
yeah, I think the biggest thing that from what I've read, what I've experienced in life, and what I've talked to other people about, and that kind of stuff, the number one thing is that people like that really want to give you a reason to look at how you can fix them, how you can help them, because you want them to go back to the person they were, but they were never really that person. And
Right.
that's the biggest thing. Like when I talk to other people who are really trying to claw their way through something as harrowing as a domestic, violence situation, I'm like, but were they really that person? And the more that they question that, they're like, wait a second, actually, in year one, these three things happened. But it wasn't as obvious as what I'm seeing now. But wow, actually, he had no respect for my boundaries or my space or whatever it is. And they're like, right, that started a lot of, and I'm the same, I've been in that position myself. So it's like, right, exactly. But you're absolutely right. Like people will say, well, I'll say this, the forgiveness is for you, meaning forgive yourself for not knowing any better.
Forgive yourself, but don't forgive them. Right.
And there's a point where it's just like, as long as you're not carrying something heavy or hateful,
Right.
which is again
Right.
going to
Right.
affect you, then
Right.
you can step away. There's really no point, because no matter how long, I know people who kept trying and trying and trying because there were kids involved, and really just trying, like saying to the kid, like, look, he's a complicated man, but like you keep going to see him and that kind of stuff. And then but the guy never got like a bed and never got, so the kid's
Right.
sleeping on the floor or something like this. And you're just sort of like, eventually there's a point where the kid's going to get old enough to go, this isn't cool. And hopefully the parent on the other side can just go, you know what, you're right, I support whatever you want to do, and that's the best you can do. And yeah, I like the idea of Jupiter. I think that's it's a fine way to do it. It's all hard. It makes it
Yeah.
all so complicated, and it's a shame, because honestly, again, when there's kids involved, those are the people who really, really struggle and
Right.
suffer,
Right.
and that sucks. And that's where I really wanted to talk. That's why I gave the protagonist role to a 16-year-old. If this would have been with an adult publisher, I'd have been like, all right, Jane's still the main character. And there's plenty of adult books with 16-year-old protagonists.
Yeah, that's right. That's
I
right.
mean, I got To Kill a Mockingbird. Oh, not. I don't mean that. I mean, I got Catcher in the Rye sitting right there,
That's
and that
right.
was an adult book. But I mean,
It's
adults are all
it's
phonies, right?
marketing. Yeah, it's marketing. I want to read some lines from the book, which I feel is all you. And it's just the sentences were so wonderful. I wrote them down. Make a world unto yourself inside your gorgeous little head. Don't make the best of terrible situations. Why not pick the lock and free yourself? I love that. I love that. I feel like that is like such astoundingly good advice that you can save yourself, and it's in your head.
Well, since I was a kid, I remember, because my mom was very open about sexism. It was ERA time. It was the 70s. She gave me an ERA pin. We talked about it. We were like we were all stoked when Carter got it, to 81 to get it ratified. Still not ratified, just throwing that out there. But like, she made me realize, without scaring me, that women were not respected and were not listened to in the outside world. And I was just a little girl then. So I was like, oh, well, so I'm just going to have to make a new space. And I did. And it was in my closet was called my office for years. And I would go in there.
Oh, I love that.
I know. Cool, right? And I would go in there and I would do all kinds of things, read a lot, write stuff, whatever. But like, the idea of just being a complete weirdo, and different and not adhering to those rules was massive for me. That said, it doesn't mean that I wasn't stuck and I couldn't get stuck in the same type of
Right.
relationship that Mina did. So it's sort of interesting that on one hand, I have this world inside my head. On the other hand, I'm just a big gooey heart that just wants to help everybody.
Right.
And so you end up with somebody who manipulates you, and that is going to be a sticky situation.
That's right. Well, we need to stop now. I want to remind everybody bookshop.org.
Yeah,
So
shop
easy,
indie.
so easy to remember. It'll point you to your nearest indie bookstore. It's a great thing to do, builds a community, helps writers, helps readers, helps everybody on the planet, even on the planet Jupiter. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for the questions. We'll see you all next time. And Amy, you stay on because I have more to talk to you about. And wait, I have one more. I actually have one more question for you, Amy.
Okay.
This is a question somebody asked me last week, and I thought, wow, that's such an interesting question. I want to start asking all the writers that. What do you do for fun?
Oh my gosh, what a great question.
Isn't that a great question? It's so
I
interesting. It reminds you it's not all work, work, work.
Well, for years, it was always all work, but now, I paint. I
You
paint.
paint.
I've always was a painter, so I paint. I also weave. That's more for just anxiety. But I paint, and that's actually been the work of my heart all year. And it's been absolutely wonderful. At
Do
the
you
moment,
have paintings here you can show us?
I don't have any up here.
No.
The studio is
Okay.
downstairs, and actually, just because of a weird mammal
Weird.
infestation in my garage, I'm about to have an actual studio, which is really cool.
Oh,
But at the
fantastic.
moment, I'm using my dining room. But yeah, I've been making big paintings of runways that I take pictures. I take pictures of the runway when my planes land because all the really cool markings are really wild. And then you have like behind it, you have like nature. So the juxtaposition of the two is wild. So I've been just doing this series of
That
runways.
is wonderful. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you
Amy,
guys.
stay on. We'll see you all next time. Bye.